Hello again, and welcome back to Educator.com's Advanced PHP with MySQL course. In today's lesson, we're going to be continuing development of our web application. And what we're going to be doing is we're going to be updating to a new version, version 2.0, and basically what we're going to be doing is incorporating the information that we learned in our last lecture about the HTTP post method. So this slide basically lists the different changes that we made to the web application. One of the first changes that we made is we updated all of the site's current forms that actually submit data with the intention of doing something. For example, the Contact Us form, the checkout form. Both of those either email an order or an order's information, or email something to the website administrator. Additionally, viewcart.php, because that's something that submits an order information that causes a basically it submits the number of items number of a particular items that you want. It causes a total to be calculated. We're going to use the post method there too. So basically, we're going to update all those forms to use the post method, and because we're using that new superglobal we were introduced to called _post, we're going to create a new method called process_post_var, which works the same way as our process_get_var does. It basically checks. We use it to create short forms of post variables. Basically checks to see if a post variable was provided. If it was, it sets the value of the short variable equal to it. If not, it sets it equal to null. So if we go ahead and take a look at one of the scripts, for example, contactus.php, you can see here at the beginning where it processes the form variables. You can see now that it has two variables that it processes: the action post variable and the contact info post variable, which is an array of contact information. It uses this process_post_var method to process that variable, because these these variables are now submitted via post. Because if we actually go down and look at the HTML output for this, and where we see the form where the user inputs their name, email address, and their comments, you can see that we've updated it to use the post method. And so this and checkout.php and viewcart.php have all been updated to use the post method. We can actually go just real quickly and look at our documentation and see that in our utility file we have a new function called process_post_var, and like I said, it functions the same as the process_get_var. Basically, if it tests if a particular post variable is set, returns the name of it if it was, the value of it if it was, and returns null otherwise. So now that we've learned about this post method, we actually, in this lesson, we're going to set up basically the beginnings of an admin website. And our admin website is going to allow us to basically add items to our store, and add items, for example, to departments. So we're not going to be implementing the full functionality of that site today, but we are going to sort of be setting up the forms that we're going to use. We're going to be setting up two forms, one that's for adding a new item to the store, and one that's also for adding an item to a department. So it adds an existing item to a particular department. So what we've done is, if you look at the version 2.0 of this web application, you can see that in the directory, there's a new directory called admin that we've created, and that's where we store all of our, we're going to be storing all of our admin site files. There's three files that have been created: admin.php, which is sort of the home page, and then there's additem.php, which is going to be a page that we're going to use to add an item to the store, and add item to department.php, which is what we're going to use to add an item to a department. So when we add a new item to the store, let's say it's a football, we want to add it to the sports store, it's going to enable us to do that. One other thing to note is that, well, first of all, let's go ahead and look at what this admin store looks like. So if we, in the version 2.0 directory, if we click on the admin link, or the admin folder, we go to admin.php, we can see the home page. Welcome to the educatorstore.admin site. And on the left-hand side, it basically has links to different tasks that you can perform. Right now, we've only set up 2 tasks, and we're going to be adding more as this course progresses. So, for example, when we click on the Add Item task, we can see that a form shows up that is eventually going to allow us to add a new item to our store's database. It allows you to input a name, a price, a description, and then select from 3 different image file extensions. It also has the form add item to department.php, and when we click on that, basically what it allows you to do is it allows you to enter an item's ID, and a department's ID, and it creates the association between the two of those. Both of these forms that we've set up, if we look at the source code, where's the form definition? Where's the form definition? I don't know why the source code isn't showing up right, but let's go look at the actual source behind it. If we look at add item to department.php, we can, I don't know why I couldn't find that in there. We can see that it sets up a form that basically submits the item ID and the department ID to itself using the post method. And so basically in this first output HTML section, what it does is if no action is provided to the form, and action is a post variable that we use, it's going to say output that form. If you go ahead and submit that form, then what it's going to do is it's going to have a section that's going to process that. Right now it's not actually going to add an item to the department because we haven't gone over how to write to files yet, which is how we're going to first enable to do that. So sort of for the sample application, if we do it, we're just going to output a message that says item ID would have been added to this department with department ID. And if we look up at the top here, we can see that we've used the process postvar method to process the action for the form, and then also to get short variables for the item ID and the department ID. One thing that we actually do up here as part of validation for this form is we make use of our item exists and department exists functions, which are part of our file IO library, and it basically is going to test. It's only going to allow this form to be valid if you submit a item ID and department ID that are actually items and departments that exist in the store. So the thing I wanted to mention was that if you actually look at this form, or excuse me, at this script, we have an include file. It looks, the pages look similar to our regular store, but we've actually created some new constants called HTML admin header and HTML admin footer. And basically, those are just slightly modified versions of our header and footer files that are located. If we go back and look in the includes directory, we can see that we have two new files here, admin header and admin footer. So all these admin pages are going to make use of these new admin header and footer files. So that's why this admin site looks the way that it does. So for example, to demonstrate this form, if we go ahead and type 1001, item 1001, which we know exists, we know department 1 exists, we're going to say add it to the department. It's going to say item 1001 would have been added to department number 1. And in a future lesson, we're going to go ahead and add the functionality that actually does that. Now, as mentioned, one of the things that it does is it actually tests to make sure that both the item exists in the database and the department exists. Right now, there's only 3 departments in the database, and we know that they have the department IDs 1, 2, and 3. So if we try to add an item 1001 to department 4, that test at the beginning that's going to test if the item and department already exists in the database, it's going to say an item ID or department ID you provided was invalid. Now, for add item, it doesn't have full functionality right now, but one thing that it does do is when we add a new item to the store, basically, we're going to need to generate an item ID for it. So for example, right now, all 6 items in the store have the IDs 1001 through 1006. When we get to the point where we'll be adding a new item to the store, we're going to take the ID of the last value, the numerical ID of the last item added, and we're going to increment it by 1. So the next item we add to the store is actually going to be item 1007 in this particular case. Because if we look at our items.txt, we can see that we have 1006. So what we've actually done, I've actually added another sort of data file in the includes directory called lastadded.txt. What that does is that has the ID of the last item that we added. And what that does is that's going to allow us to easily see when we try to go ahead, when we start implementing adding a new item to the store, it's going to allow us to easily pull what the last item added was and then go ahead and increment that. Otherwise, we'd have to do more file I/O by searching through the entire items.txt file to figure out what the last item added was. So it's sort of a way to simplify that. So we've now have this sort of last added text file that's going to enable us to do that. So in add item.php, when you submit the form, and let's go ahead and try that. Try baseball, $15. And we go to add the item. It's going to say the item you added would have been assigned item 1007, and that's because if we go and look at our last added text file, it has item 1006. And then what it says, these are the values that you submitted. So basically, it uses the post superglobal to get this information. And we actually haven't added this file because this is sort of a mock setup right now because we haven't learned how to write to files yet. But what it did was in the script, in the beginning here, what we did was if the action of the script was to add an item, then we call this getLastItemAdded function, which is a new function that we've added to our file library, which we're going to look at in a second. That basically, what it does is it goes out and reads that last added file to find out what the ID of the last item added was. And then in this case, it adds 1 to it, and it says this is what the item ID would be if you had added this item to the store, because it's going to get incremented by 1. So actually, if we go ahead and look at the documentation for this version, we can see in the file library there's a new function called getLastItemAdded. And what that does is that, as it says, it retrieves the ID of the last item added to the store. And it uses because it's all of our functions that open files. For example, we have functions that are used to open our items data file and our departments data file. Because there's this new data file, we've also created sort of this helper function that's used in this method called openLastAddedFile, which basically opens that file lastAdded.txt. And we've created a constant in our config file to set the path to that particular file. Basically, this method is just going to open it and return false if it's not able to successfully open it. And then all we do is we basically, as we had done in our other file I/O examples, we basically just all we're doing is reading the first line from the file using fgets method. We set that to we say this is the last item ID that was created. We close the file. We test to make sure that the item ID is valid, that it's not empty, that first line isn't empty, that it was numeric, and then we return the value. And so that's how that getLastItemAdded function works. And the other thing to mention is that in our store.php page, on our main site, in this version we've updated it because before we used to list the departments and then all of the different items in the department. Because now we're getting to the point where we're going to be adding new items to the store, and we don't want to have all of the items listed on the web page. Let's say we add 100 items. We're just going to list the departments here. So we've changed this so that it just basically dynamically generates links to all the different departments. And if we go and look at that code, store.php, we can see that now instead of manually outputting links to each department and each item, we just loop over all of the different departments. And here we're using our getDepartments method that we learned about in the last web application lesson that's going to get an indexed array of all of the departments in our store, and then we're going to output a link to that department using that new method that we developed called outputSimpleDepartmentLink. And so now we've basically set up sort of this almost you could say like body of our admin application. And in our next web application lesson, after we learn how to write files, we're going to implement that functionality of adding the item to the store and of being able to add an item to a particular department. So that ends today's lesson. Thank you for watching Educator.com, and look forward to seeing you next time.